So we've been talking a lot about British politics because we've got the election coming up over here. But as you all know, there is another equally, if not more important election for the entire world coming up in November, that being the American election. And I think it's interesting to note that after the debate last week, I think the debate is a watershed moment for one thing in particular, which is the question of the deep state. The deep state, that thing that we're told over and over again is a far-right evil conspiracy theory. But I think now the regime is kind of going to have to plump out and say, okay, yeah, there's a bit of a deep state going on. They'll find euphemisms for it. They'll find different ways of wording it. But realistically, nobody who watched the debate last week thinks that Joe Biden is actually in charge of anything. He's not even in charge of his own bowel movements.
I was about to say that.
I got to it first. And so everybody is going to have to say to themselves, well, who is in charge of America then? Because you're supposed to think the executive is the last step on power. He's the one who has ultimate decision making. Joe Biden, no. So who is? Well, you're going to have to admit that at some point, okay, there's going to be a whole host of bureaucrats, heads of three-letter agencies, and NGOs, and honestly, just a whole blob of people that you've never even heard of, and you never will hear of, who are actually in control and making the decisions and pulling the levers of power. And it's interesting because we are going to get more and more people admitting this, slyly or not, and basically, as far as I'm concerned, normalizing it. Not in a way to try and hurt the regime, but to try and bolster it. As we'll find out, basically advertise it in a way that, shouldn't you be grateful? Shouldn't you be grateful that if you have a senile old man shitting himself on television as the president, then aren't you glad that someone's in charge? That's what I can
already sort of hear them in my head justifying what they're doing, just like, are you not grateful for more checks and balances? You know what democracy's like. You can elect the wrong person. Therefore, having a few people to keep the excesses in check is actually a good thing. It keeps America stable and stops us causing problems.
Yes. But on the mention of the election, just a reminder to everybody that we do have the election night stream, again, going out tomorrow, starting at 7. It's free to anybody on the website, and you can also tune in on Rumble, so you don't have to be a member or anything, although you should be, or else I'm going to judge you because you're obviously too poor to afford a membership. And if so, maybe you should be not watching this, and maybe you should be going and working and earning some money for yourself, you damn layabout. Also, anybody who's ordered a copy of Islander, that should be at the end of this week printed and sent out, if I'm right there.
Yes. If you are too poor to afford a membership, we also have a discount going on.
Yes, we do have a discount going on for all of you scroungers out there, which is code 0 seats. So jump on that as quickly
sales
as
tactic.
possible. Hey, shaming has worked plenty of times before. If you neg the audience, they pay up. This is what I have learned. So, back to the deep state, which totally doesn't exist according to the most reputable, trustworthy source ever, the one that all of your teachers in school tell you to use, Wikipedia, which says that according to an American political conspiracy theory, so not poisoning the well at all with that very first line, the deep state is a clandestine network of members of the federal government, especially within the FBI and CIA, because they've always known to be upstanding organizations, working in conjunction with high-level financial and industrial entities and leaders to exercise power alongside or within the elected United States government.
But isn't there the Hunter Biden laptop story where, wasn't it, at least 30 senior members of...
It was 51.
Was it 51?
Yeah,
51. I was going to say that, but I, for some reason I thought it was fewer, but around 50, if not more, people in the intelligence agencies telling tech companies to preemptively censor this Russian disinformation story that turned out to be true in the lead up to an election.
No.
Well, surely that is in conjunction with high-level...
That's conjecture. That's misinformation. That's a Russian conspiracy.
Didn't they
spreading
shoot
there, Josh?
JFK and throw out Nixon from office?
No, that's Russian misinformation. Now, Josh, I know that you may have spent many hours staring at those pictures of Hunter Biden's penis.
It haunts me. When I close my eyes, I see its shadow.
But that doesn't mean there was any conspiracy. The only thing the FBI was trying to do was save those pictures from being plastered all over everybody's Twitter feed. So it was for the sake of prudence.
Can the CIA get them out of my head, please?
If we,
please.
well, lucky for you, there
Help
was
me.
this incredible scheme called MK Ultra, which was totally above
I
board
like that one, yeah.
and elected by the electorate and the voter base. As far as I'm aware, at least, that's what the CIA does, right? They work with pure democratic mandate.
Yeah, didn't they spike random people with LSD? So, sounds good to me.
So obviously, conspiracy. It goes on to say here, the term deep state originated in the 1990s as a reference to an alleged long-time deep state in Turkey, but began to be used to refer to the American government as well, including during the Obama administration. However, the theory reached mainstream recognition under the presidency of Donald Trump, who referenced an alleged deep state working against him and his administration's agenda. Now, remember this for a moment, because as ever with these kinds of evil and fake conspiracy theories, you can find a lot of evidence for them simply by scrolling past the opening paragraphs of the Wikipedia page and see what it says here. If you go down where, of course, Chuck Schumer says, oh, it's really, really dumb. He criticized the CIA, but also you shouldn't criticize the CIA because, quote, let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back from you. Because that's not an admission of anything at all.
That is undermining what he said almost immediately.
My favorite one, though, is if I find it down here. Where is it? Here we go. In 2018, the New York Times published an anonymous op-ed by Department of Homeland Security Chief of Staff Miles Taylor titled, I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration, attributed at the time to a senior official in the Trump administration. In the essay, Taylor was critical of President Trump and claimed that many of the senior officials in his own administration are working diligently from within to frustrate parts of his agenda and his worst inclinations. So again, Wikipedia, conspiracy theory, maybe double check your own page for evidence of the conspiracy theory being real. I mean, this is straight from the horse's mouth. Come on.
They just started saying it.
They just started saying it. Well, have you got any evidence for that? Well, yes, here he is saying it himself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
also, there's plenty of evidence of parallel things in the UK as well.
Of course,
lots of people.
Connor's interview with Liz Truss went over that. What was it? The OBR projections.
The OBR on the Bank of England. As soon as she said that she wanted the lower migration, they said that they would essentially run a reputational blackmail exercise by publishing damning statistics saying the economy would take a hit and therefore lower our standing with world banks. So you can't deviate from consensus policy, otherwise you will become the shortest sitting prime minister ever.
All sounds above board to me. What were you saying, though, Josh?
I was just going to say that there are plenty of people in the civil service, and we've known this for some time. It's a running joke in Yes Minister that actually it's the people who aren't elected that are running the show. And that's the whole premise of that show, which was long before modern times,
Stephen Edgington keeps doing exposés for GB News about how all the civil service members are pumping loads of money into pride initiatives while on work hours.
Well, there was a critic article that he wrote as well in the most recent issue where he was talking about that and actively naming names and saying, here is the name of a person who is actively trying to force this agenda and ideology onto his department underneath him. We should fire him. A pretty good suggestion if you ask me, but no such thing as a deep state. And it's very amusing because if you look at this is quite a recent article from Foreign Affairs, June 10th. So obviously before the debate. And this is what I'm going to talk about with the watershed moment. There's the before Biden goes out and embarrasses himself again, even worse than before, to the point where you can't deny it, even if he had a cold. No, I've seen people on colds. They're not that bad. And then after moment of when it comes to talking about the deep state. This is incredible. This is one of the worst articles I've ever read. I'll read a few excerpts from it so you can see that this person, John D. Michaels, clearly didn't even proofread his own article, saying that the deep state doesn't exist, but if Donald Trump gets in, he will build his own deep state.
So it's possible that one can exist within the American political system.
But it doesn't yet.
Oh,
unless Trump gets in, and then the deep state is real. Projection all round. He would rely on loyalists within federal agencies to pursue an aggressive agenda, which would include, among other things, authorizing the largest deportation program in US history, based, purging supposed thugs and criminals from the justice system, based, policing women's sports to prevent transgender women from participating, based, and censoring classroom instructions to ban certain kinds of lessons about race from US schools, also based. So he might actually implement the agenda that he would be elected into office of. So this is terrible. This is awful, and we in the civil service and people within the administration need to work to prevent that. His plan, backed by a powerful network of right-wing lawyers and activists, Christopher Rufo presumably, in line for senior appointments should Trump prevail in November, is not to obliterate federal regulatory and law enforcement agencies, but to colonize them, radicalize them, and weaponize them to do their commander-in-chief's bidding, which is implicitly saying that these organizations already hold a ridiculous amount of power.
Isn't that what they're supposed to do anyway? The president should command executive authority. That's as the head of the executive. That's kind of the point.
It's also very different to our civil service because the civil service appointments aren't selected by the sitting administration. The administration in America gets to cycle out any federal employee it likes. They didn't do that the first time around. They were going to do that at Schedule F, and it didn't work. This time around, they have competent people.
And now there is also Project 2025, I believe, from the Heritage Foundation.
And other friendly organizations, including people that I have spoken to, and they are very on the ball with this. They have our similar way of thinking.
Yes, but again, bear in mind the implication of that statement, and then it finishes the paragraph by saying, instead of eradicating a purported deep state, Trump is angling to create one. There's a bit of a contradiction.
Hang on, how can you eradicate something that isn't there?
Question. Here's, Josh, this is going to be your possibly favourite sentence from this entire thing, and it might cause you to have a brain bleed. So prepare yourself.
Had one of those, they're not very nice.
There are no state-owned utilities of consequence with the United States government, and with the notable but practically Neolithic exception of the Civil War, the country has no culture or history of bureaucrats, military officers, or other government functionaries engaging in subversive, usurping, or otherwise anti-democratic projects. It's so blatant.
The ATF would like a word.
It's such a bald-faced lie. The cheek to write something like that is quite remarkable.
There are no dead kids in Waco.
The article starts by referencing Waco. I mean, honestly. But then...
This should be used as, like, this is the dictionary definition of gaslighting. A very long...
No, it isn't.
Good job, I picked up on that.
And then, like, a few paragraphs later, the author says this. In his first term, Trump achieved very little by way of shrinking the overall size of government, slowing the pace of regulation, or disciplining federal employees who don't toe the MAGA line. Worse, those government officials whom Trump and his surrogates slurred and slandered as disloyal, including Anthony Fauci and Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, regularly outmaneuvered him while taking care not to show him up for the good of the nation. So what they're saying is, he did have people usurping him from below. He did have people working against his agenda who are permanent, to a degree, employees of the state outside of the reach of a democratic mandate, except for what the executive can do to shift them around. Are you serious? How could you write this and then write that? But then it does reveal some interesting information at the bottom, which I wasn't aware of, which further cements the point here, which is the Biden administration has recently promulgated a rule that protects career government workers from being reclassified as at-will employees, precisely to thwart Trump's plans to summarily dismiss tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of federal workers. So they're trying to even more deeply cement themselves into the system.
You can use an executive order to get rid of that, and people will be on the watch for that.
But it is still an attempt to try and make these entrenched bureaucrats even more so than they already are. And then it finishes, oh my God, I'll scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then after this incredible example of gaslighting.
This left-wing meme.
Yeah, you are...
All the text.
You are... Oh, dear God. How long does it go? Is somebody...
It never
The election has already happened.
Here we go. It ends with this. Time and time again, civil servants in the United States have proven themselves to be faithful, resourceful stewards to the American people and the laws passed in their name. Incredible. Absolute. I mean, give it a round of applause, folks. That is the worst thing I've ever read.
If by the American people they mean whoever walked across the border yesterday, then yeah.
This is so disjointed, so contradictory, so insane, I can only assume Joe Biden himself proofread it for the author and made some suggestions. But that's the kind of discourse that was going on about the deep state prior to the election, prior to the debate. Now what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing articles like this in the New Statesman from Sohram Ahmari, who you're aware.
The owner of Compact Mag. I believe that he is actually a Trump supporter, but he's a sort of left-wing economic Trump supporter.
I wouldn't be surprised. He is former neocon. To be fair to him, he's a critic of David French, so that's something that we share in common with
Low bar.
It's true, but still, come on, Connor. He says Biden's performance should make us grateful for the deep state. So it does exist, and that's a good thing. Now, I checked his social media, and I noticed that he was responding to criticism of this headline by saying, oh, well, the article was written with tongue firmly in cheek. And that might be true.
Whose cheeks? The deep state's backside?
I'm not going to speculate. But let's read a little bit of it and judge for ourselves whether this is really as damning an indictment of the deep state as you would want it to be if the whole thing is supposed to be a bit of a tongue-in-cheek ribbing of the three-letter agencies. No, ribbing, Connor, ribbing. The permanent bureaucracy, especially the national security apparatus, pursues its own long-term plans according to its own logic, even if this means frustrating the will of elected leaders. But Thursday night's US presidential debate raises the question, is that such a bad thing when the elected leader in question is an 81-year-old mired in the shadowy bogs of semi-senescence? And yet, the federal Leviathan moves despite all of this. It manages the largest... Bear in mind as well, the previous article said it doesn't really own anything of consequence. Well, he points out here, it manages the largest landholding in the United States, amounting to 640 million square miles, or more than a quarter of the country's land area. Oversees the world's biggest economy and prints the world's reserve currency. Air Force offers the commander-in-chief sovereign options that would have been unthinkable to any emperor in the past. It boasts 11 aircraft carriers. It can execute mind-boggling logistical feats like launching civilian spacecraft beyond the solar system or arranging the movement of an entire armored division from bases in, say, Texas or Colorado to the Baltic states. It can intercept basically any and all electronic communications, which sounds a lot like a hefty amount of power for whoever is in charge of the agencies controlling that, correct? And then he goes on to say, what we call the Biden presidency is actually a joint effort by a cohort of national security lawyers and military industrial types. Think of Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, though most of them are far less visible than he is. I would also assume international banking and finance interests would have a lot to do with that as well, but that's just speculation on my part. The security apparatus has come to anchor the consensus. By consensus, of course, we mean the things that the security apparatus already wants to do. Diminishing the influence of presidents and legislators, this probably isn't a healthy development for a democratic republic in the long term, especially because try as they might, the aforementioned national security lawyers and military industrial types aren't close enough to Main Street Americans to give fuller effect to the popular will. They don't care about the popular will. Hence, for example, the Bidenites' self-destructive refusal to rethink open borders until it was too late. The upside of the deep state capacity to do its own thing on a consensus autopilot, as it were, is that few of the liberals' worst fears are likely to come to pass as Trump smashes his way past the dazed Biden to become the head of the Leviathan. Now, again, this is all supposed to be tongue-in-cheek, but it still has quite a conciliatory air to me of, yeah, it exists, and it is kind of useful, and it still perpetuates a lot of the myths to do with the liberal democracy as it exists in America right now, which is that it's existing on some kind of democratic consensus that's been handed to it by the electorate. When we know for a fact the CIA, the FBI, the ATF, all of these organizations work for their own goals, their own interests, and don't give a damn what you in the public think. If they did, then again, they would rethink open borders. And the very fact that this was published in a mainstream publication like the New Statesman suggests to me that we're going to get more and more of this kind of thing, tongue-in-cheek at first, but more and more we're going to get talk of how the deep state is actually of benefit to you.
To normalize frustrating Trump's agenda.
Yes, basically. Basically, if he gets in, and we've already seen how Europe, the EU is talking about how they can basically make themselves a bulwark against Russia if Trump gets in and Trump pulls out of NATO, or at least relinquishes some of the control of NATO that America has, or just pulls out altogether. And I've also seen in foreign policy, I've mentioned this recently, they were talking about how they can Trump-proof the Ukraine agenda. and the Ukraine war. So they are already trying to put blocks in the way of Trump in case he does get in, and in case they're not able to butter him up the same way they were the last time, and he actually tries to do something that his voters want him to do.
So 2 very minor quick things on that. First off, I did see reporting today that Ukraine has been prevented from joining NATO until it cleans up its corruption problem. So I think that's been put on hold for now. 2, I've heard from credible sources that Trump's VP pick will be Marco Rubio, not just because he can speak fluent Spanish and trounce Kamala Harris in a Telemundo debate, but because he is on the House Intelligence Committee. He's from an old Florida dynasty near where the intelligence services are based, and he can play nice with the deep state apparatus that frustrated Trump from before. And this is why Trump helped co-author the Ukraine funding bill with Mike Johnson, and Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, had said, well, I wasn't going to fund them before, but I had a meeting with the FBI and I realized it was my duty. So it seems there's going to be a sort of playing nice with Trump and the deep state, and this might be why Amari's written this piece, actually.
Perhaps, but also, if this kind of thing becomes more and more common, that you're just going to throw out all semblance of the facade of democracy and just say, well, you're really ruled by a bunch of unelected bureaucrats. I think within maybe the next 10 to 15 years, we might just see the point where our democracy is no longer even pointed to, and it's just you throw away all of the fake shit. You throw away all of the nonsense to do with elections and just say, yep, we rule you, get over it, essentially. So that's my prediction.
Hi folks, thanks for watching. If you'd like to support us and you enjoy the work we do and you want to help us keep the lights on, because of course we're demonetized on YouTube, go over to lotuseast.com, sign up for only £5 a month, and go and watch some of the amazing premium content there, such as Connor Tomlinson's interviews with fascinating people. He has previously interviewed ex-Prime Minister Liz Truss, but recently he has interviewed Mary Harrington, a kind of dissident feminist who recognises, as we do, that we are being governed by a uniparty, and the state of affairs needs to change. Also, while you're at it, go and follow us on Twitter at lotuseaters_com, and we will see you soon.